The Third Day, The Frost, by John Marsden. Chapter 1. Sometimes I think I'd rather be frightened than bored. At least, when you're frightened, you know you're alive. Energy pumps through your body so hard that it overflows with sweat. Your heart that does the pumping, bangs away in your chest like an old windmill on a stormy night. There's no room for anything else. You forget that you're tired or cold or hungry. You forget your banged up knee and your aching tooth. You forget the past, and you forget that there's such a thing as the future. I'm an expert on fear now. I think I felt every strong feeling there is. Love, hate, jealousy, rage. But fear's the greatest of them all. Nothing reaches inside you and grabs you by the guts the way fear does. Nothing else possesses you like that. It's a kind of illness, a fever that takes over you. I've got my tricks for holding fear at bay. We all have, I know. And they work in their own ways, some of the time. One of my tricks is to think of jokes that people have told me over the years. Another's the one Homer taught me. It sounds simple enough. It's to keep saying to yourself, I refuse to think fear. I will think strong. I will think brave. It helps for mild fear. It's not so good for panic. When true fear sweeps in, when panic knocks down your walls, no defense can keep it out. The last 2 weeks I spent in hell were solid boredom. The kind of time you long for when you're terrified. The kind of time you hate when it's happening. Maybe I was a fear junkie by then, though, because I spent a lot of time lying around thinking of dangerous things we could have done, wild attacks we could have made. These days I don't know whether I'm murderous, suicidal, addicted to panic, or addicted to boredom. I wonder what happened to the people who were in the world wars after the fighting was over. There were mostly men in those wars, but there were plenty of women too. They weren't necessarily soldiers, but you don't have to be a soldier to be affected by it all. Did they press their off buttons on the day peace was declared? Can anyone do that? I know I can't do it. I seem to be getting used to the way my life's gone lately, from total frenzy to total nothing. But I often dream of the regularity of my old life. During school terms, my days always started the same way. I'd have breakfast, cut my lunch, pack my school bag, and kiss Mum goodbye. Dad would usually be out in the paddocks already, but some days I'd get up early and have breakfast with him. Other days, when I got up my normal time, he'd be still in the kitchen, toasting his backside against the aga. For years, as soon as I was big enough for my feet to reach the pedals of a car, I'd driven myself to the bus. Kids living on properties can get a special license to drive to school buses, but we never bothered with that. Dad thought it was just another stupid bureaucratic rule. From our house, it's about 4 k's to the gate on Providence Gully Road. It's not our front gate, but it's the only one on the school bus route. Like most people, we have a paddock basher, an unregistered bomb, mainly for kids to use, or for stock work. Ours was a Datsun 120Y that Dad bought for $80 at a clearing sale. Usually I took that, but if it wasn't going properly or if Dad wanted it for something else, I'd take the Land Rover or a motorbike. Whichever it was, I'd leave it sitting under a tree all day while I was at school, and I'd pick it up again when I got off the bus. School was okay, and I enjoyed being with my friends, the social life, the goss, the talking about guys, but like most rural kids, living on a farm took up as much energy and as time and interest as school did. I'm not sure if that's the same for city kids. Sometimes I get the feeling that school's more important for them. Oh, it's important for us too, of course, especially nowadays when everyone's so worried that they won't be able to make a living on the land, won't be able to take over their parents' places, the way they used to assume they would. Every country kid these days has to think about setting up in some other work. What am I thinking about? For a few minutes there, I was back in peacetime when our biggest worry was getting a job. Crazy. Now those dreams of becoming brain surgeons, chefs, hairdressers and barristers have gone up in smoke. Smoke that smells of gunpowder. The dreams now were simply of staying alive. That's what Mr. Cassar, our drama teacher, would call a different perspective. It's nearly 6 months since our country was invaded. We'd lived in a war zone since January, and now it's July. So short a time, so long a time. They came swarming across the land like locusts, like mice, like Patterson's curse. We should have been used We should have been used to plagues in our country, but this was the most swift, sudden, and successful plague ever. They were too cunning, too fierce, too well organised. The more I've learnt about them, the more I can see that they must have been planning it for years. For instance, the way they used different tactics in different places. They didn't bother with isolated communities, or the outback, or scattered farms, except in places like Wirrawee, my hometown. They had to secure Wirrawee because it's on the road from Cobbler's Bay, and they needed Cobbler's Bay because it's such a great deep water harbour. But Wirrawee was easy enough for them. They timed the invasion for Commemoration Day, when the whole country's on holiday. In Wirrawee that means show day, so all they had to do was grab the showground, and they had 90% of the population. But to take the big towns and cities they needed a bit more imagination. Mostly they used hostages, and for hostages mostly they used children. Their strategy was to make things happen so fast that there was no time for anyone to think straight, no time to consider. At the slightest delay they started blowing things up, killing people. It worked. Those political rats, our leaders, the ones who'd spent every day of peacetime telling us how great they were and how we should vote for them, felt the water of the drowning country lapping on their ankles. They took off for Washington, leaving chaos and darkness behind. Yes, it was cunning, it was brutal, it was successful. And because of them, or because of our own apathy and selfishness, our peacetime ambitions had been vaporized, and we suddenly found ourselves living lives of fear and boredom. Fear and boredom weren't our only emotions, of course. There were others. Even pride came sneaking in occasionally. In mid-autumn, just 5 of us, Homer, Robin, Fee, Lee and I, had launched our biggest attack. We'd used gas to blow up a row of houses where a major command post had been based. We'd beaten the odds and caused an explosion that would register 11 on the Richter scale. There was no mushroom cloud, but it had everything else. That was spectacular enough, but we didn't fully realise what we'd done until afterwards. We'd struggled back to our mountain hideaway, intending only to detour for some food, and had made a terrible discovery of the body of our friend Chris. We had brought him with us and buried him in our sanctuary, the wild basin of rock and bush known as Hell. And there we'd stayed for weeks, gradually made aware by the ferocity of the search for us just how far we'd promoted ourselves on the most wanted list. We were scared by the toughness of the search. With no access to news except for occasional radio bulletins from other countries, we had no way of finding out who we'd killed or what we'd destroyed, but we were obviously in more trouble than a dog in a mosque. When the search calmed down and the hunting helicopters returned to their lairs, we calmed down a bit too. Still, we were in no hurry to do anything rash. We stayed in our bush home for a few more weeks. With plenty of food, even if there wasn't much variety, we lay around and ate and slept and talked and had bad dreams and shook and cried and jumped up trembling at sudden rustles in the undergrowth. It affected us all in different ways. Lee got a nervous twitch, especially at night, that pulled the right side of his mouth up towards his eye every time he spoke. And when we made love, even though he said he enjoyed it, and he'd start off all excited, his body wouldn't do what it wanted it to do, what he wanted it to do. What I wanted it to do, what we both wanted it to do. Robin stopped eating and sleeping. She'd always been nicely plump and round, but she started getting skinny, fast, the kind of ugly skinny that I've always hated in my friends. "You think you've got problems?" she said to me one day when I lost my temper over a can opener that wouldn't work. "I'm a paranoid, anorexic insomniac." It was one of our few jokes, only it wasn't very funny. Homer sank into a silent depression and went for days at a time without a word to anyone. He spent hours sitting on a rock looking up at Taylor's stitch, and it seemed like the only time he used his voice was to have a tantrum. His temper, which had always been edgy, was now out of control. When it came to arguments, I'd always matched Homer yell for yell, but for a few weeks there I joined the others and melted away into the bush when he exploded. Me, I sort of did a bit of all those things, plus some. My particular speciality was flashbacks that were so lifelike I was sure they were real. I'd smell something and it'd set me off. A bit of plastic on the fire at night, and the next thing I was back in Buttercup Lane and the air full of burning rubber as trucks slid into each other on screaming tyres. My mind couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't. It was like having nightmares, except that I was awake. Sweat ran down my face so fast my eyes would be stinging, then I'd be gasping and then hyperventilating. Needless to say, I had nightmares when I was asleep too, till I got scared of going to sleep. It's so long since I've had a good night's sleep, I can't even imagine anymore what it'd be like. But I dream of it, daydreams that is, and long for it. The one who handled it the best of any of us at that stage was Fee. Fee was so lightly built that she looked like a grasshopper. She was all leggy. Maybe that was why I always thought of her as frail, easily broken, needing protection. But she had a strength that I could never quite figure out. I don't know where it came from or where she stored it, how much heart she could fit inside her little frame. How tough could that balsa wood body be? It's not that she had no feelings. Fee had always been mega sensitive. She seemed strung like a violin. The slightest touch made her vibrate. But the terrible things we'd done didn't eat away inside her like they did the rest of us. She rose above them. One reason, maybe, was that she was so sure we were doing the right thing. She was proud of what we'd done. I felt proud sometimes, but truth to tell, I never knew whether to be proud or ashamed. For all that, when the call for action came again, we answered it. Maybe we answered like robots, programmed to kill and destroy, but we answered.